On Christmas Eve, I returned without warning. I found my daughter lying in the cold, shivering under the snow, while her husband and his family laughed by the fire as if nothing was wrong. I opened the door with my heart burning. I carried her in my arms and said 6 words that no one will forget. I am glad you are here. If you are watching this video, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are listening to this story from. A story of a father who turned pain into justice. I want to know how far the truth reaches. The bus arrived at the Chicago terminal almost at 9 at night. I got off slowly, my body numb from the cold, carrying a bag with gifts and a bouquet of red roses that had already withered a little during the trip. The wind hit me full on as soon as I took the first step off the platform. I wrapped myself better in the gray scarf that Emily had knitted for me last year, the same one that said for my dad, with love. I had not seen her for a long time. Since she married Michael, our calls became shorter and less frequent. I told her I would spend the holidays alone. She replied that she had commitments with her husband's family. But that night, something inside me urged me to come without warning. Maybe it was nostalgia, or simply the need to see my daughter. I took a taxi. The driver was a young man with a wool cap. He looked at me through the rearview mirror and smiled. "To a family dinner, sir." "Yes," I replied, "with my daughter. I have not seen her for a long time." The man nodded while the windshield filled with snowflakes. Jingle Bells was playing on the radio. The streets were full of lights, illuminated trees, children with red hats, and people carrying bags of gifts. Everything seemed so warm, so different from what I carried inside. The taxi went up the hill toward the suburbs. As we moved forward, the snow became denser. I told the driver to stop in front of a white 2-story house, with large windows and Christmas decorations hanging from the roof. An angel of lights turned slowly over the entrance, and a huge pine tree shone in front of the porch. I paid the fare, wished him a Merry Christmas, and got out. My boots crunched on the ice. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of burnt wood and cinnamon. In the distance, laughter and the clinking of glasses could be heard. Emily's house looked perfect, like a postcard. I thought about the surprise she would get, seeing me arrive without warning. I imagined her hug, her smile, her voice saying, "Dad, I cannot believe you are here." I took out of my pocket the small velvet box I had kept for weeks, a silver bracelet engraved with the phrase for my girl with love, Dad. I held it in my hands carefully and went up the porch steps. But something stopped me. The snow completely covered the steps. There was not a single footprint, not a recent mark of boots or shoes. I leaned in, observing more closely. Everything seemed intact, as if no one had gone out or entered all night. I rang the bell once. No one answered. I leaned toward the large living room window and looked inside. The scene was so warm it hurt. A long table covered with a red tablecloth, full of dishes, turkey, stuffing, pies, glasses of wine. The tree lights blinked softly. Around the fire were the Millers, Mr. Edward, Michael's father, with his eternal look of sufficiency, Linda, the mother, laughing while toasting with her glass, Sarah, the younger sister showing off a new dress, and Michael, my son-in-law, standing by the fireplace serving wine, kissing his mother on the cheek and telling something that made everyone laugh. Everyone was there. Everyone except Emily. I leaned against the wall, trying to distinguish her figure. She was not at the table, not in the kitchen, not by the tree. I took a few steps toward the side of the house, calling her in a low voice. "Emily?" The wind blew hard, lifting the snow from the ground. I walked along the side garden until I reached the small backyard. The porch lamp flickered, and under its yellow light I saw something that froze my soul. A gray wool sweater hanging on the wooden chair. The same sweater I gave her last winter. It was soaked, hardened by the ice. My heart began to beat strongly. I bent down. I touched the garment. It was completely frozen. I felt a bad feeling rise in my chest. "Emily?" I whispered with a broken voice. No one answered, only the sound of the wind and the fire crackling inside the house. I took a few more steps toward the garden. The snow reached almost to my ankle. In the corner near the old swing she had painted, white herself, I heard a slight noise, like something falling. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight, and then I saw her, a hunched figure covered in snow, sitting on the porch bench, arms around her knees, head down, tangled hair covering half her face. Emily! I screamed and ran toward her. Her lips were purple, her skin white as paper. She barely looked up. Her cloudy eyes recognized me. Dad, she whispered, and her body collapsed on me. I took her in my arms. She was so light, so cold that I felt afraid of breaking her. I took off my coat and wrapped her clumsily. Her breathing was weak, barely a thread. I ran back to the front of the house, stumbling in the snow. I banged on the door with all my strength. Open up! I am Emily's father. Open up now! Inside, the music kept playing. We wish you a Merry Christmas. No one answered. I banged again harder until finally the door opened suddenly. The light from inside blinded me for an instant. Michael appeared in front of me still with the glass of wine in his hand, his face confused and annoyed. What are you doing here, William? I shouted at him with all the contained rage. My daughter is dying outside, and you are toasting. Silence fell like a blow. Everyone in the room stopped speaking. Linda pressed her lips together. Sarah looked away. Mr. Edward frowned. The fire in the fireplace sparked behind them, illuminating their motionless faces. Michael slowly lowered the glass, looked at Emily fainted in my arms, and took a step back, not knowing what to do. I felt how the heat from inside clashed with the cold of my daughter's body. The contrast was unbearable. Call a doctor. I screamed now. No one moved, not a word, only the crackling of the wood and the echo of my own heartbeat. In that instant, I understood that the house that was supposed to protect my daughter was actually the place where they were destroying her. I pressed Emily against my chest, breathing with difficulty, and I swore that tonight I would not just be a spectator again. Christmas Eve was over, but for me that was the night everything started. I entered the living room without asking for permission. The heat of the fire hit me in the face, but inside me everything was still frozen. I placed Emily on the sofa, wrapped in my coat. With her face so pale she barely seemed to breathe. No one moved. Everyone stood there looking at me as if I had just burst into a stranger's party. Linda, Michael's mother, was the first to speak, wrinkling her nose with a gesture of annoyance. She surely went out because she wanted to. She always makes dramas, she said, without even getting up from her seat. I turned to her, feeling my blood boil in my temples. Dramas? Her body was frozen. Lady. Frozen. Michael left the glass on the table and looked at his father, waiting for his reaction. Mr. Edward, with the arrogant tranquility that characterized him, took a sip of his wine before answering, Do not exaggerate, William. Your daughter has certain psychological problems. Sometimes she goes out in the cold to cry. She likes to attract attention. The words pierced me like knives. I took a deep breath, trying not to scream. But then Sarah, the younger sister, intervened from the corner with a mocking smile. Dad says she fakes it, that she always manipulates everything to play the victim. I looked at my daughter. Her hands were rigid, her skin bluish, her lips cracked. None of them approached. None moved a finger. Bring me a blanket, I ordered, without raising my voice. Linda shrugged. The one she was using is dirty, she replied coldly. It got wet with the snow. I advanced toward the fireplace, tore off the thick blanket hanging from the back of a chair, and wrapped it around Emily. Her breathing was still weak. Mr. Edwards stood up with a grave and authoritative voice. Do not come into my house like that, William. Here there is respect. I turned to him, gritting my teeth. Respect? Respect is what my daughter has lacked since she married your son. Michael took a step forward with a tense jaw. She left alone. No one kicked her out, he said with a cold voice without looking directly at me. And if she dies tonight? I replied. Are you also going to say it was her fault? Silence fell like a weight. The fire crackled in the fireplace, and the smell of roast beef mixed with the tense air of the room. None of them dared to hold my gaze. Linda sighed with a tone loaded with contempt. Take her then, if you love her so much. Here she only brings misfortunes. I stood still. I looked directly at her. Then I looked at everyone else. No one. Not even Michael came close to see if my daughter was still breathing. No one. This does not end here, I said with a broken but firm voice. What you have done is violence, and you are going to pay for it. Michael took a step forward, raising his voice. Enough. Do not come to give us lessons, old man. This is my house, and you have nothing to do here. Your house, I repeated with bitterness. I hope one day you understand what it means to have a real home. I pressed Emily against my chest and headed for the door. Linda muttered something under her breath, and I heard stifled laughter. I did not want to turn around. The wind hit hard when I went out. The snow was piling up on the path, and the air cut my skin. There were no taxis at that hour, and the road was almost empty. I walked with Emily in my arms, step by step, slipping on the ice, gritting my teeth not to cry. Every time the wind blew, I felt my daughter's body cool down a little more. After almost a mile, I saw the light of a pharmacy still open. I knocked on the door with my elbow. An older woman with white hair tied in a bun opened it upon seeing us. Good heavens, she said. Come in quickly. The woman helped us get in. She put a chair next to the heater and brought warm towels, some ginger tea, and a jar of ointment. She is freezing, she murmured while helping me cover her. What happened to her? Her husband and his family left her outside, I answered with a hoarse voice. In the middle of Christmas Eve. The woman shook her head, scandalized. People are losing their souls, she whispered. I took out the phone to call an ambulance, but Emily opened her eyes for just a second and grabbed my wrist weakly. No hospital, she murmured. Dad, please do not let them know. Her voice was barely a thread. I nodded, knowing that arguing would only exhaust her more. It is okay, daughter. Do not worry. The woman gave me a worried look. If I take her to my apartment, I can take care of her better, I said, almost like a plea. She nodded, handed me a bag with medicines and blankets. Carry her in your arms, and do not leave her alone tonight. I went out into the cold again. I raised my hand to stop a taxi. One finally stopped, and the driver rolled down the window. Everything okay, sir? No, I replied, but it is going to be. The young man helped me put Emily in the back seat. During the ride, I looked out the window. The city lights seemed to blur with the snow. In the distance, fireworks and laughter could be heard, while I held my daughter's hand, praying she would keep breathing. We arrived at my small apartment downtown. It was a modest room with a sofa bed, an old stove, and a heater that barely worked. I placed Emily on the bed, took off her shoes, wrapped her feet with warm towels, and turned on the heater to the maximum. The silence was absolute, only broken by the hum of the device and the tapping of the wind against the windows. I prepared hot water with ginger and honey, and when I returned, her breathing was more regular. Then the phone rang. I looked at it. It was Michael. I hesitated a few seconds before answering. What do you want? I asked, not hiding my tone. His voice sounded cold, distant, full of contempt. Do not interfere in my marriage again, William. You do not understand how things are? How things are? I interrupted him. Leaving your wife to die of cold while you toast with your parents? Is that what you call marriage? Do not provoke me, he replied. Emily always looks for excuses, and you, as always, fall for her games. If you ever had a shred of shame left, you lost it tonight, I told him, and hung up. I threw the phone on the table with a lump in my throat. I went back to Emily. I put a cup in her hands, although she was still sleeping. The clock struck midnight. Outside, the wind kept roaring, bringing with it the echo of a distant song. Silent night. Holy night. I stayed there, sitting by her side, watching her chest rise and fall slowly. Every breath was a small victory. For a moment I thought about everything I had kept silent for years. The times I noticed her sadness over the phone. The tears she hid when she said, I am fine, Dad. I always thought that love and time would cure anything. How naive I was. That night I understood everything. It was not a simple family problem, nor a misunderstanding. What they had done was cruelty, and no one, absolutely no one, was going to go unpunished. I squeezed my daughter's hand with a calm that only contained rage gives. The snow kept falling out there, covering the streets like a silent cloak. Inside the apartment, the clock struck 12:30. That was the first Christmas Eve in years that I did not pray. Not a single word came out. I only had one certainty. What had started as a surprise visit from a father to his daughter had turned into the beginning of a war. A war that, although I did not know how I planned to fight until the end. I did not sleep that night. I sat next to the bed, watching the reflection of the heater dance on the walls. The wind whistled between the cracks of the window, making the glass vibrate. Outside, the city slept under a thick layer of snow, but inside the apartment, only my daughter's irregular sighs could be heard. Emily had a fever. Her forehead was soaked in sweat, and every now and then she mumbled meaningless words. I changed the damp cloth, wiped her face with a warm towel, and replaced the ginger tea with mint infusion. I saw her so fragile, so far from the strong woman she used to be, that I felt a pang of guilt. It was almost 3 in the morning when she opened her eyes. She looked at me with a mixture of bewilderment and tenderness. "Dad, have you not slept?" she whispered. I shook my head. "I am here. Rest, daughter." She nodded slightly and closed her eyes again. I stayed a while, watching the steam come out of her breath, weak but constant. Outside in the distance, the wail of an ambulance could be heard fading into the night. The snow hit the glass with a slow, almost hypnotic rhythm. I checked the phone. I had 3 missed calls from Michael and a short message. "Do not look for her anymore." I deleted it without thinking. I felt a mixture of fury and disdain. I lowered the blind and turned off the main lamp, leaving only the yellow light of the heater. Then I covered Emily better with a thick blanket and sat down again with my hands clasped. Near dawn, I heard her weak voice. "I thought they were going to change," she murmured. "I thought if I endured a little more, everything would improve." I leaned toward her and caressed her hair. "You do not need them to change, daughter. You just need to get up." A tear rolled down her cheek. I did not want her to see me cry, so I looked away toward the window. The first lights of the day barely dyed the sky gray. When the church bells rang, I got up to make coffee. The aroma filled the air, mixing with the balm I had rubbed on her chest. Upon returning, Emily was already sitting holding a cup of hot water in her hands. "You have to go to the doctor," I told her. "We cannot risk the fever going up." She refused, almost with fear. "No, Dad. If I go, they will find out. Michael has acquaintances in all the hospitals. He will come, and I do not want to see him again." Her voice broke on the last word. I did not insist, but took out my contact book. I remembered someone who could help me. Dr. Moore, an old friend and doctor who treated me when I was still training martial arts. I called him immediately. He answered sleepily, but upon hearing my name, he reacted. "William, is everything okay?" "Not much," I replied. "My daughter is sick. I need you to come. She cannot go to the hospital. I am coming right away." He arrived shortly before 10 with his leather briefcase and his coat covered in snow. His hair was totally gray, but his voice remained firm. He examined Emily carefully, took her temperature and pulse. "She is weak but stable," he said. "She suffered mild hypothermia, nothing irreversible. She needs rest, fluids, and constant heat." He handed me some medicines, and before leaving stopped at the door. "William, if I were you, I would call the police." I did not answer. He looked at me with compassion, as if understanding that I was not yet ready to take that step. When he left, the sky remained cloudy, but the snow had stopped. I put on my coat and went down to the market. I bought chicken soup, fresh bread, milk, and some oranges. The vendor, an old woman with a blue apron, looked at me curiously. "Is your daughter sick?" "A little," I said. "She just needs to rest." She smiled. "Nothing that a good meal and a father's love cannot cure." I walked back slowly, thinking about her words. Upon entering the apartment, I found Emily standing, folding her clothes with slow movements. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I am going back to the house," she said, without looking at me. "I need my papers, my things. Then I will go to another state." I felt my breath cut short. "You are not going anywhere." She stopped with her hands trembling over a blouse. "Dad, I do not want you to get involved in this. They are powerful. You have no idea what they can do." "Yes, I know," I replied, "but I do not care. They cannot keep hurting you." She sat on the edge of the bed, hiding her face in her hands. "I have no strength anymore. It hurts even to breathe. If I keep fighting, they are going to destroy us both." I knelt in front of her, took her hands. "Listen to me, Emily. I spent my whole life teaching others not to give up. Today, it is my turn to remind you. You are not alone. From now on, I will be the one to protect you." She raised her head, her eyes swollen and wet. "Dad, do you really believe there is still justice?" "I do not know if there is," I said, "but I know there is truth, and I do not plan to stay silent." She remained silent for a few seconds, then nodded. For the first time in days, she looked at me without fear. I went to the desk drawer and took out an old notebook, the one where I used to write down training schedules. I opened it to a blank page and wrote with firm handwriting: "Lawyer, police, evidence, witnesses." She approached surprised. "What are you going to do, Dad?" "What I always do," I replied. "Face the combat, head on." The clock struck 7 in the evening when Emily fell asleep again. The fever had gone down a little. I stayed by the window, watching the sky darken completely. I lit a cigarette, something I had not done for years. The smoke rose in slow spirals. I thought about Michael, about Mr. Edward, about that rotten family that had learned to hide cruelty behind money and appearances. And I also thought about my daughter, the girl who once ran into my arms after her first tournament with a medal around her neck and a proud smile. Now that same girl trembled with fear in my bed. At 10 at night, the silence was absolute. Only the slight murmur of the heater could be heard. I poured myself some cold coffee and opened the notebook again. I wrote under the list: "No impulses, only strategy, patience." I went out to the small balcony. The air was still freezing, but I did not care. I needed to feel it on my face, remind myself that I was alive. I looked toward the city. The lights of the buildings flickered in the distance, and a strange sensation ran through my body. It was not anger, nor sadness. It was a dense calm, the kind that precedes decisions that change life. I stayed there for a long time with my hands resting on the railing until I felt the door behind me open. Emily was in the doorway, wrapped in the blanket. "What are you doing awake?" she asked with a soft voice. "Thinking," I replied, "and making a promise." She approached slowly. "What promise?" "That you will never be afraid again," I said without taking my eyes off the horizon. "That no one will ever hurt you again while I am alive." She rested her head on my shoulder without saying anything. We stayed like that, watching the city lights tremble in the distance. That night I understood that the combat awaiting me would not be with fists or kicks, but with words, documents, patience, and dignity. When I finally closed the window and turned off the lights, a certainty burned in my chest. The man who once taught others to defend themselves was about to face the toughest fight of his life. And although winter was just beginning inside me, there was already a flame that did not plan to go out. Dawn arrived gray, with a thick fog covering the roofs of Chicago. I had spent the whole night turning over the same thing: the rage, the helplessness, Emily's fear, the silence of the guilty. By that time I had no doubts. I could not keep waiting for life to fix itself. If I stayed still, they would win again. I put on my thickest jacket and left early for the police precinct. The air cut my skin, but inside me I felt a strange heat, a determination I did not remember since my years as a master in the gym. The police building was half empty. The guards were still drinking coffee and yawning. I asked to speak to someone in the complaints area. A few minutes passed before a young officer came out the side door. He wore his cap crooked and had a sincere smile. It took me a few seconds to recognize him. "Daniel?" I asked, surprised. The boy looked up and stood still. "Master William? I cannot believe it." He hugged me with a mixture of respect and affection. "I have not seen you for years. What brings you here?" I sighed. I did not know where to start. I told him what happened the night before, from the moment I found Emily in the cold to Michael's call. As I spoke, Daniel's expression changed. His smile disappeared. "The Miller family," he murmured, lowering his voice. "They are powerful. They have contacts in the court, in the press. But that does not mean we cannot do something." "I do not want revenge, Daniel," I clarified. "I want justice." He nodded firmly. He took me to his desk, turned on the computer, and started writing the report. "We are going to record everything: psychological violence, abandonment, danger to physical integrity. It is not little master, but it has to be done right." While typing, he looked at me sideways. "This might annoy more than one person. If you start this process, there is no turning back." "It does not matter," I replied. "We have already come too far to keep quiet." When he finished, he printed the document and passed it to me to sign. The ink trembled a little in my hand. Daniel stamped the paper and put it in a folder. "Now you need a good lawyer. Someone who does not get scared." "I know one," I told him. "An old friend." We shook hands. Daniel squeezed hard. "Count on me for whatever you need, master. You taught me to get up after every fall. It is time to give something back." I left the station with the folder under my arm. The sun was barely peeking through the clouds, but for the first time in a long time, I felt I was breathing with purpose. I took a bus downtown. Lawyer James Ross's office was in an old building with yellowish walls and the unmistakable smell of coffee and damp papers. When I entered, he recognized me immediately. "William," he exclaimed, standing up. "Years have passed. How is your knee?" "It still hurts when the weather changes," I replied, smiling barely. But I did not come for that. We sat face to face. I told him everything without omitting details. James listened in silence, barely moving his fingers on the table. When I finished, he let out a long sigh. "This will be complicated," he said. "Mr. Edward Miller has friends in the court and in the prosecutor's office. He is not going to like being touched." "I do not care how many friends he has," I replied. "I do not plan to stay silent." James observed me carefully, as if measuring my determination. "Agreed. But I need proof. Something solid. Without that, everything dilutes." I took out my phone and looked for the audio file I had accidentally recorded that night. When I played it, Mr. Edwards' voice rumbled clear. Insults, mockery, cruel phrases about my daughter. Michael also spoke, laughing, justifying what they had done. James straightened in his chair. "This can work. It is strong." He took quick notes. "We will have to certify the audio, but it is a start." We spent more than an hour preparing the formal complaint. He explained every step: the request to the prosecutor's office, the possible citation, the deadlines, the risks. I nodded in silence without taking my eyes off the folder that would soon bear my daughter's name. Before leaving, James warned me, "Until the judge signs the order, keep this secret. Do not talk to the press or anyone in the family." "Understood," I said. "I do not want noise, only truth." Upon leaving, the sky had cleared a little. I passed by a small print shop and asked for copies of everything: the complaint, the medical reports, old hospital bills, the text messages where Michael humiliated her. The young clerk looked at me curiously. "Is it for a legal case?" she asked while the printer buzzed. "Yes," I replied with a low voice. "It is to protect my daughter." She handed me the sorted papers and wished me luck. I walked back slowly, feeling the weight of each sheet as if carrying with me the whole history of our wounds. That night, when I arrived at the apartment, Emily was preparing soup. The smell of chicken filled the place. She looked at me with concern. "Where were you?" "I went to see an old student and then James Ross. We already have a complaint." Her face tensed. "Dad, you should not have done it. They are going to take revenge. You do not know what they are capable of." I already know, I replied calmly, but they have already done enough damage to us. They cannot take more from us. She remained silent, looking at the pot. Does Daniel know too? She asked suddenly. I nodded. She lowered her gaze with what? A slight blush. He helped me once, when Michael pushed me in front of the store. He accompanied me to the car. I did not tell you before because I was afraid. I felt a pang in my chest. I clenched my fists but restrained myself. He is a good boy, I said. You can trust him. We ate dinner in silence. Then she retired to her room and I went out to the balcony. The city shone in the distance with twinkling lights, and Christmas carols still heard from some neighboring house. People celebrated peace while we were just starting a war. I went into the room and opened the closet. There, kept for years, was my martial arts instructor certificate framed in old wood. I took it in my hands. I remembered all the times I taught my students that strength is not measured in blows, but in the discipline of staying on your feet. I placed the diploma on the table next to the newly signed complaint. Two different symbols, but both spoke of the same thing: honor and courage. I lit a candle more out of habit than faith. Its weak flame trembled in front of the papers. For you, daughter, I murmured. I will not stop until they know what they did. The clock struck midnight. Outside, the distant barking of a dog and the rumor of some car could be heard. Inside, Emily slept, and her breathing was a reminder of why I was doing all this. The next morning, the smell of freshly made coffee filled the apartment. I prepared 2 cups and knocked on her door. Wake up, daughter. Today we are going to court. Emily opened her eyes confused. What? So soon? There is no time to lose. The sooner we take the step, the better. She sat on the bed with a pale face. Dad, I do not want to see them. I cannot. I approached and took her hands. In the ring, the strongest does not win, but the one who dares to step up first. Today we are going to step up together. Emily took a deep breath and nodded. She put on her coat, gathered her hair, and followed me. On the way, the bus crossed the main square, where some children were playing, throwing snowballs. I watched them from the window. I remembered my daughter when she was their age, laughing free before knowing fear. Now I had her by my side again, more fragile, but also braver. When we got off in front of the court, the wind blew hard again. I looked at Emily. In her eyes, tired but firm, I saw a flash I recognized. The same look I had when stepping onto the mat before a match. Ready? I asked. She nodded. And as we climbed the stairs of the gray building, I understood that the real battle was just beginning. Not in the body, but in the soul. And this time I did not plan to lose. Dawn was gray, without color. A thick fog covered the city like a damp sheet. The sky looked like lead, and the streets were silent, as if the whole city was holding its breath. I prepared coffee and served it in 2 cups. I put 2 sugar cubes in mine and let the steam rise slowly, filling the small apartment with that familiar smell that for an instant made me feel calm on the pet. Stove the oatmeal bubbled. I served a plate and put it in front of Emily. Eat something, daughter. You need strength. She nodded without looking at me. She had deep, dark circles and dry lips. She wore a brown sweater and the wool scarf I'd given her myself. Her hands trembled when she took the spoon. You just have to tell the truth, I told her, resting my hand on hers. No more, no less. I will be by your side. She nodded again in silence. When we came down from the building, the cold air hit our faces. In front of the entrance, Daniel was already waiting for us. In a gray, unmarked car, the one used for civil cases. He wore a dark jacket, his face serious, although he tried to smile. Ready, master, he said, opening the back door. Room 3 is waiting for us. During the ride, Daniel told us that the judge had agreed to move up the hearing due to the media pressure that existed lately with cases of domestic violence. People are talking, he said, and that helps judges not look away. While he spoke, I watched out the window. The city was alive again. Sales stalls, Christmas lights still hanging, speakers repeating carols out of season. In a store, Last Christmas was playing, and I wondered if that year I would have any reason to celebrate anything. Emily kept looking out with her forehead resting on the fogged glass. I put a hand on her shoulder. She said nothing, but her breathing calmed down a little. The court building appeared at the end of the avenue, old with white columns and mustard-colored walls. Above the main door, the national shield looked blackened by time. On the stairs, a couple of reporters waited with cameras. James Ross was already there. He had his coat open and held a thick folder and a cup of coffee. Upon seeing me, he greeted me with a slight nod. "It is not going to be easy, William," he said in a low voice. "They bring 3 lawyers. Let them bring 1,000, I replied. I am going in anyway. We went up the stairs together. Inside, the air smelled of humidity and disinfectant. Steps echoed on the marble. In the hallway, I recognized the Miller family immediately. Michael was sitting next to his father with the arrogant gesture of always. Next to him, Linda, with her fur coat, was glancing at a small mirror to touch up her makeup. Sarah played with her cell phone, indifferent. Michael looked up and saw me, smiled with disdain. "Still think you can win, old man?" he whispered when I passed close. I did not answer, only put a hand on Emily's shoulder, and we kept walking to the door of room 3. The judge, a man of about 50 with graying hair and rectangular glasses, was already on his bench. When we all took our seats, he banged the gavel once. "The session is open," he announced. "Case 47-3125, complaint for psychological violence and family abandonment." James stood up. "Your Honor, I represent Mrs. Emily Miller, victim of verbal abuse and family abandonment committed by her husband, Michael Miller, and by the Miller family as a whole." The opposing lawyer, bald man in a gray suit, also stood up. "My client categorically denies the accusations. Everything is an invention. Mrs. Miller suffers from emotional episodes and left the house of her own free will." The judge signaled for James to present evidence. "We bring audio recordings, medical reports, and police testimony," James said, handing over a USB drive. The playback of the audio filled the room. Mr. Edwards' voice resonated clear, arrogant, mocking Emily. Then Michael was heard calling her crazy, and Sarah laughing. Emily lowered her head, tears falling silently on her hands. The judge raised an eyebrow. Silence. "Who recorded this?" My client answered James. "She was present, and it is direct proof of the facts." The opposing lawyer hit the table. "Objection. Violation of privacy. That recording must be discarded." The judge took a deep breath, thoughtful. "The court will evaluate it," he finally said. The atmosphere became thick. The air smelled of tension, fear, and contained rage. I saw Emily shudder. I moved my chair closer without saying a word. "Mrs. Miller," said the judge, "you may testify." Emily stood up slowly. Her voice trembled at first, but gradually became firmer. She related how they left her out in the snow, how she heard the laughter from inside, how her body began to go numb until losing consciousness. Every word was a blow. Mr. Edward let out a dry laugh. "Christmas drama. My daughter-in-law has too much imagination," he said with cynicism. I stood up suddenly. "Shut up, you scoundrel!" I shouted. The judge banged the gavel. "Order in the room." I took a deep breath and forced myself to sit down. Emily put a hand to her chest, as if afraid they would arrest me too. When they called the next witness, Daniel entered in uniform. He walked with a firm step, greeted the judge, and declared having found Emily with symptoms of hypothermia and visible marks on her arm and shoulder. "That is in the police report," he added. The Miller lawyer smiled sarcastically. "And who guarantees she did not cause those marks herself?" he said with irony. Daniel looked directly at him. "I saw her, sir, and I saw the fear in her eyes. No person does that to themselves alone." The room fell silent. Even the judge looked up at him. The hearing continued for hours. Documents were reviewed. Messages from Michael full of contempt were read. At times I felt we were gaining ground, at others that everything could collapse from one instant to another. When finally the judge concluded the session, the clock marked almost noon. "The court will deliberate on the validity of the evidence and determine a new date for the preliminary resolution," he announced. We got up slowly. Upon going out into the hallway, a dozen journalists crowded in front of the door. Microphones, cameras flashes. William, is it true your son-in-law left her outside under the snow? Are you going to ask for preventive prison for him? I did not answer, only pointed with my head toward Michael. Ask him. Michael, surrounded by his family, smiled at the cameras. He put an arm around his mother's shoulders and said with a martyr tone, My wife needs medical help, not a trial. She has problems since before the marriage. Cameras flashed. Reporters wrote frantically. Everything sounded like a well-rehearsed show. Emily, hearing his words, broke into tears, covered her face, and ran toward the street. I followed her, pushing my way through the flashes and questions. Daniel was waiting for us with the car running. I opened the back door, helped Emily get in, and got in after. The engine roared, moving us away from the court. I looked through the rear window. The Millers were still on the stairs, posing for the cameras, laughing, as if nothing had happened. Inside the car, silence was thick. Emily hugged herself, looking into the void. Daniel drove without speaking. Only the noise of traffic and the slight tapping of the rain starting to fall could be heard. I rested my hand on my daughter's leg. Do not give up, daughter. This is just beginning. She nodded without looking at me. Her eyes were red, but her voice, although low, sounded firm. I am not going to give up, Dad. Not this time. I looked out the window. The court was lost in the fog. In my chest, a mixture of pride and rage boiled like a silent fire. I knew with a certainty that burned me inside that this was not a victory nor a defeat. It was only the first round, and I had spent a lifetime preparing to fight until the end. The second day of the trial dawned with a deceptive sun. There was clarity, yes, but the air remained freezing dry, the kind that cuts the skin when breathing. I got up before dawn, unable to sleep more. I prepared coffee, put 2 sugar cubes, and heated some oatmeal with honey. I wanted Emily to eat something before facing hell again. She came out of her room in silence with a pale face. She wore the same brown sweater from the previous day and the scarf I had put around her neck. Her hands trembled slightly, holding the cup. You just have to tell the truth, I told her, with a low voice. Nothing else. I will be with you. She nodded without looking up. We left the building shortly after 8. The street smelled of freshly baked bread, but the wind was icy. When we arrived at the court, James was already waiting for us. He had his coat closed up to his neck and held a large envelope. I brought the voice verification he told me in a low voice, handing me a copy. The expert confirmed that the recording matches Mr. Edwards' voice. This can be our key. I nodded. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. But that feeling crumbled as soon as we entered the room. On the bench was not the same judge from the previous day. In his place was a younger man with a perfectly trimmed mustache and an expensive suit. The plaque on the desk read, Honorable Ernest Suarez. I remembered that name instantly, an old acquaintance of Mr. Edward, a businessman with political influence. I looked at James, who only returned a tense look. Calm down, he whispered. Do not react yet. Michael was sitting on the other side in a tailored gray suit and that sure smile I hated so much. Sarah played with her hair, and Linda, his mother, observed everything as if it were a theatrical performance where she already knew the ending. The judge banged the gavel once. The hearing resumes. The Miller family lawyer stood up with a rehearsed tone. Your Honor, my client has endured years of psychological harassment by his father-in-law and his unstable wife. He put emphasis on that last word. My body reacted on its own. I stood up with rage, but James took my arm before I said a word. Easy, he whispered. Do not fall into their game. The lawyer continued speaking now, showing photographs. Projected on the screen, old images of Emily smiling at family parties, hugging Michael. Proof that their relationship was harmonious, he said, looking at the judge with false conviction. What she describes are episodes, product of her emotional imbalance. Emily lowered her head, hands clasped on her lap. I could feel her trembling. I wanted to scream, but James signaled me again. Wait. When our turn came, James stood up calmly. Your Honor, he said with a firm voice, The defense tries to turn an aggression into a fantasy. But here are facts, documents, and medical evidence. He placed on the table a bundle of papers, hospital receipts, psychiatric reports, photographs of the bruises. These are Mrs. Miller's medical results. Depression is not invented. Injuries are not fabricated. The judge glanced at the papers reluctantly without really looking. They are not conclusive, he finally said. They could be due to a domestic accident. I felt a chill run down my back. For a moment, the murmur of the room vanished. I only heard the tapping of the clerk's pen. James requested that the recording presented yesterday be accepted as complimentary evidence. It is verified by an authorized expert. The judge looked up with a grimace of annoyance. Denied. The recording was obtained without consent. It is illegal. The murmur became a buzz. Michael sketched a smile of triumph and murmured something in his father's ear. Mr. Edward listened, nodding with a satisfied air. I could not contain myself. This is a mockery. I shouted, hitting the table. The judge raised the gavel with fury. Silence, or I expel you from the room. James touched my arm. William, please, he whispered. I took a deep breath. I sat down, but the heat in my face was unbearable. My blood boiled. The hearing continued. The Miller lawyers spoke as if reciting a script. They said Emily had outbursts that I manipulated her to get money. Every word was a stab. After almost 2 hours, the judge ordered a recess. I went out into the hallway. The air there was as dense as inside the room. Emily was leaning against the wall with red eyes. Daniel appeared with 2 cups of coffee. Breathe, master, he said with a calm tone. It is not over yet. I took a sip and nodded. I did not know if it was coffee or ash. A journalist approached with a recorder. Does William believe the judge is bought? I looked at him without saying a word. What you see today, I finally told him, will answer itself. We returned to the room. The judge entered accompanied by an assistant. His expression was impassive. James adjusted his glasses, already prepared for the worst. The judge read for a few seconds, then began, The court finds no sufficient evidence of violence or verifiable physical abuse. Consequently, divorce is granted without guilt of the parties. The sound of the stenographer's keyboard mixed with James's resigned sigh. I felt a void in my stomach. Michael let out a brief laugh and leaned back in the chair. See, he told his mother, everything is in order. Emily did not react. She remained motionless, looking at the blank paper in front of her until a tear fell and left a circular stain on the sheet. I stood up slowly and walked toward the bench. My daughter was abused, and you know it, I told the judge. Is that also legal? The judge looked up but did not answer. The security guard approached cautiously. Please, William, he whispered. I looked at him and nodded. I went back to Emily, helped her stand up. Let's go, daughter, I told her. There is nothing else to hear here. As we crossed the room, Mr. Edwards' voice resonated behind us. That is how the weak are treated, William. Learn. I felt Daniel move by my side, willing to respond, but I raised my hand to stop him. It is not worth it, I told him without turning my head. We went outside. The midday light was too bright. Journalists pounced with questions and flashes. Emily clung to my arm, trembling. What are you going to do now, William? Is it an unfair sentence? I did not answer, only advanced, opening a way through the crowd. Then a female voice, trembling but strong, rose among the noise. Courage, William. The truth always comes out alone. It was an older woman with a blue scarf on her head. Her look reminded me of my mother many years ago. I stopped. A second looked at her and nodded in silence. Daniel helped us get into the car. As we drove off, I saw through the rearview mirror how Michael and his people posed in front of the cameras, smiling as if they had just won a medal. The ride back was silent. Emily rested her head against the window and closed her eyes. When we arrived at the apartment, she went up without saying a word, went into her room, and closed the door. I was left alone in the kitchen. On the table, I spread the documents. Bills, reports, copies, testimonies. Everything looked like the battlefield after a defeat. The phone rang. It was James. I am sorry, William, he said with a tired voice. The court is corrupted. I will try to appeal to another instance, but it will take time. Thank you, I replied simply. I hung up. I poured myself the last rest of cold coffee, but did not drink it. I went to the balcony. The sun began to set, dyeing the buildings orange. The wind blew strong, lifting papers. In the street, I stayed looking at the horizon, the mountains in the distance, the golden sky that slowly faded. I felt the cold in my bones, but also a bitter calm. We lost the first battle, I thought, but the war is not over yet. And while the ringing of the church bells filled the air, I knew that what they had tried to silence was beginning at last to be heard. It rained all night. The rain did not fall with fury, but with that constant sadness that seems never to end. The sound of drops hitting the tin roof filled the apartment with a monotonous rhythm, almost hypnotic, but impossible to ignore. The air was damp cold, and every corner smelled of loneliness. It was close to 7 in the morning when I heard the door to Emily's room open slowly. She walked to the kitchen with slow steps. Her eyes were swollen, her gaze lost. She had spent the night crying, I knew without asking. I poured her a cup of chamomile tea and put it in front of her. Drink a little, daughter. It will do you good. She did not answer. She sat down, looked at the cup, and let the steam rise, covering her face like a faint cloud. Tomorrow I will go to James's office, I said, trying to sound calm. I want to know how the appeal resource goes. Emily shook her head without raising her eyes. Dad, I do not want to continue. They already won. No, I replied gently. They only won a battle, not the war. Silence returned. Outside, the sound of the rain increased heavier, as if the sky wanted to accompany us in grief. I went to the balcony and observed the street. Puddles reflected car lights, poles flickered, and people walked fast, huddled under umbrellas. Everything moved except us. Suddenly a sharp knock on the door made me turn. It was Daniel. He was soaked with hair dripping on his dark jacket. He carried a paper bag in one hand. I bring something for you, he said, entering with a tired smile. He put the bag on the table and took out a container with food and a couple of folded newspapers. A note came out in the Daily News. Look at this. He unfolded one of the sheets. On page 2 was a blurry photo taken from afar, but unmistakable Emily, on her knees in the snow in front of the Miller house. The headline read, Woman Abandoned on Christmas Eve, Authorities Investigate. I stayed silent, reading every line. They mentioned the complaint, the leaked audio, and cited anonymous sources from the police. They did not use full names, but everything was recognizable. When I looked up, Emily was trembling. Dad, she whispered, people know. Daniel nodded. They can no longer hide it. If you want, I can contact a journalist friend of mine, Robert Towers. He covers gender violence issues. He can help us keep the story visible. I thought about it for a few seconds and then nodded. Do it, but without publishing my daughter's full name. I do not want them to expose her more than she already suffered. Emily looked up with a low but firm voice. I do not want a scandal, Dad. I want justice, not fame. Daniel sat in front of her. Sometimes noise is the only way for the system to wake up. If no one speaks, everything stays the same. She lowered her eyes without responding, but I noticed she did not reject it. The rain began to subside, and the silence between the three no longer weighed so much. Stay for dinner, Daniel, I told him. It is the least I can offer you. He smiled, taking off his soaked coat. While heating the food, he began to tell stories from the past when he trained with me in the gym. You always said discipline was the way he remembered laughing, and that fear is overcome by taking the first step. And now? I asked. Now I understand what you meant. It was not about fighting, it was about resisting. Emily listened without speaking, but something in her face had changed. For the first time in weeks, her lips drew a slight smile, shy but real. We dined slowly. The heat of the stew filled the kitchen, and for a moment the noise of the world was far away. Daniel got up after a while, put on his coat, and said, I will return tomorrow. I have some contacts that can move the case. I do not promise miracles, but movement. Thank you, son, I said, shaking his hand. You are brave. When he left, the apartment became calm again. I heard Emily sigh behind me. "He is good, right, Dad?" she asked with a barely perceptible smile. "He is," I replied. "And not all men are like Michael." She nodded. Then she walked to her room with a lighter step than in previous days. I stayed on the sofa without turning on the television. Outside, the wind blew softly, bringing the smell of wet earth. I closed my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel fear, only tiredness and a small peace I could not explain. I slept there listening to the tick-tock of the clock. I dreamed of the years when Emily was a child, running through the garden with a smile full of life. I dreamed of the old house, the dog that used to follow her everywhere Sundays, of laughter and food. I woke up with tears in my eyes, but without pain. Dawn arrived with a clean sky barely covered by white clouds. While preparing coffee, the phone rang. It was James. "William, I have news. The case is moving. Media pressure is taking effect. Maybe we have a second hearing." My heart jumped. "When?" "Not yet a date, but it will be soon. We will need new evidence, something that links Michael directly to the injuries and abandonment." "We will get them," I replied without hesitation. I hung up, poured the coffee, and walked to the window. In the next room, Emily was awake, sitting in front of the large window. Sunlight reflected on her hair. I held the newspaper with both hands, reading the news again and again. I knocked gently on the door and entered. "The article again?" I asked her. She nodded with a mixture of sadness and relief. "I never thought anyone would believe me." "I told you, daughter. Truth walks alone. Sooner or later, it finds its way." She turned to me, and for the first time since that Christmas night, looked me straight in the eyes. There was no fear in her look, but something new, determination. "If there is a new hearing," she said this time, "I want to be ready. I am not going to be silent anymore." I smiled. I approached, put a hand on her shoulder. That is all I needed to hear. We both stayed looking out the window, watching the sun filter through the clouds. Raindrops still hung from the electric cables, shining like small pearls. The city was waking up again, and with it a timid hope, fragile but alive. "You know, Emily," I told her, "life has hard blows, but also second opportunities." "And do you think we will have it?" she asked. "Yes," I replied without hesitation, "because we do not fight for pride, but for dignity." She smiled, a complete smile this time, and in that instant I understood that although the wounds were still open, hope had entered our house again. That morning, while the sun illuminated the newspapers on the table, I knew the storm was not over yet, but at least we were no longer walking in the rain alone. 2 days later, the sky dawned clear. There was a faint sun filtering through the clouds, enough to illuminate the wet streets after the storm. The air was cold, but breathing it felt different, clean, fresh, as if something had changed in the environment, although I did not know exactly what. Emily and I decided to go out for a walk to buy breakfast at Mrs. Lucy's cart on the usual corner. The smell of coffee and hot cocoa filled the street. "Good morning, William," she greeted me with her hoarse voice accustomed to early mornings. Then she looked at my daughter and frowned with tenderness. "I saw you in the newspaper, darling. What an injustice they did to you, but how good you have your dad." Emily lowered her gaze, squeezing the cup of cocoa between her hands. "Thank you, Mrs. Lucy," she said in a low voice. "We are still standing. That is the important thing." The woman smiled. "That is it, dear. Do not let bad people take your soul." We returned to the apartment, slowly enjoying that small moment of normality. But upon reaching the door, something interrupted the calm. There was a white envelope on the floor without a sender. I opened it. Inside, there was only a printed sheet with black letters in capital letters. "Withdraw the complaint, or you will regret it." My heart skipped a beat. I looked toward the hallway, but there was no one. I locked the door with double bolts and called Daniel immediately. He arrived 20 minutes later with a serious face and his uniform jacket still damp. "Where did you find it?" he asked. "Right here in front of the door." There was no one. He took a pair of gloves from his pocket and took the paper carefully, observed it under the light. It has no visible fingerprints, he said after a moment. It is a home print. Common paper, common ink. They probably left it quickly and left. What do we do now? I asked. Nothing for now. Let me handle it. I will put someone to watch the building discreetly. I nodded, although inside rage boiled in me, not out of fear, but for the cowardice of those who threaten from the shadows. In the afternoon, James arrived with a folder under his arm. He seemed more animated than in previous days. William, there is movement, he told me as soon as he entered. The press wants to interview you. Several journalists became interested in the case. Emily heard him from the kitchen. She hesitated a moment, but then approached. Dad, if we are silent, they win again, she said with a firm voice. I looked at her. There was something different about her. She was no longer the broken woman from a few weeks ago. Agreed, I replied. But we will speak without hate, only truth. The next day, a small team of reporters arrived at our apartment. The interviewer was a young woman with short hair and an empathetic look. They brought cameras, lights, and a microphone with the logo of a national channel. I tidied up the room, opened the curtains to let in the light. I put on a white shirt and helped Emily sit next to me. She trembled a little but breathed deeply. When they turned on the cameras, the journalist asked me the first question, William, what did you feel seeing your daughter in that situation? I thought about answering with rage, but words came out differently. I felt shame for others, I said. Shame that in this country we continue to allow a woman to be humiliated, beaten, or abandoned, and everyone looks the other way. The journalist nodded. Then she turned to Emily. What do you wish now, after everything lived? Emily took a deep breath, and her voice, although low, sounded clear. I just want no one else to go through the same. That there be no more silence. The interview lasted more than 40 minutes. When the cameras turned off, the journalist approached and took my daughter's hand. Thank you for your bravery. You do not imagine how many women are going to listen to you. That night, the report aired on the Central News. We watched it on the small TV in the dining room. Our living room appeared Emily's serene face, my words, the complaint files. The screen showed in large letters a phrase that shuddered me. Silence protects the guilty. In a matter of hours, social networks filled with messages. People from all over the country shared the video using hashtags like Justice for Emily and No More Silence. My phone did not stop ringing former gym students, neighbors, strangers, even women telling their own stories. Some offered legal help. Others simply sent words of encouragement. Daniel called with an incredulous tone. Master, this went viral. More than 200,000 views in less than a day. I stayed looking at the screen, watching my daughter's image on TV. She also watched it with tears in her eyes, but this time they were different. Not of pain, but of liberation. Dad, she whispered. Now they do listen to me. I hugged her. I said nothing. Just felt her breathe for the first time without fear. The next morning, someone knocked on the door. It was Mrs. Mercedes, our downstairs neighbor, with a basket full of fresh fruit. For you and your daughter, sir, she said with tenderness. I saw the interview. How brave you are. I invited her in and served her a cup of tea. She spoke slowly with a trembling voice. My daughter also suffered violence years ago. No one believed her. I thought she was going to die of sadness. You do not know what it means to see you speak on television. Emily, who was listening from the table, got up and approached, took her hand gently. We are not alone, right? She asked. Never again, answered the woman with wet eyes. When she left the apartment, remained impregnated with a different warm silence. Emily looked at me and smiled. It was a complete, calm smile. In the afternoon, while checking emails on my computer, I saw a new one from James. The subject said, Good news. I opened it with a racing heart. William, the court has decided to reopen the investigation. Media pressure worked. There will be a new hearing. I stood still for a few seconds, unable to speak. Emily entered the room and saw me with the open email. She approached, read the screen, and suddenly hugged me tight. Dad, we did it. I felt her tears fall on my shoulder. I caressed her hair with a broken voice. No, daughter, we just started. Outside, the sunset sun entered through the window, dyeing the walls golden. The reflection illuminated the old instructor diploma that still hung over the table. I looked at it for a long time. That piece of paper represented a lifetime of struggle, of discipline, of falls and getting up. But now I understood that the most important combat was not fought on a mat, but in life itself. I turned on the lamp, took out my notebook, and wrote a single sentence. Justice begins when one stops being afraid. I closed the notebook. Outside, the city shone under a clean sky. Car lights mixed with the sparkles of stars, and in the distance, church bells rang. Emily was already sleeping, breathing calmly. I stayed by the window, observing the lights turning on in the buildings one by one like small promises. That night I understood that justice does not always arrive with uniforms or sentences, but with voices that refuse to be silent. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the flame inside me that I thought extinguished light up again, not to fight, but to illuminate the path of all those who still live in darkness. It was Monday. The Chicago sky dawned incredibly blue, as if the air itself had been washed during the night. I woke up before dawn with a strange sensation in my chest, a mixture of calm and nervousness. I prepared coffee and turned on the radio, looking to distract myself with the morning news. And then I heard it. The announcer's voice, grave, precise. The state prosecutor's office has reopened the case of family violence against the Miller family. The steam from the coffee fogged my glasses. I stood still, holding the cup with both hands. I felt the skin on my arms stand up. After so much time fighting against walls, finally someone had knocked them down. Came out of her room, hair tied in a high ponytail, a beige sweater, eyes still swollen but with a different light. "Dad, is it true?" she asked. "It is real, daughter. We did it." We hugged, saying nothing else. Outside, the sun entered through the window and bathed the kitchen with a warm glow. On the wall, the old photo of when Emily was a child seemed to look at us as if time had stopped right there in that instant, when she still believed the world was fair. The phone rang. It was Daniel. "Master, the media wants to cover the new hearing. It will be public." "Perfect," I replied. "Let everyone see what really happened." 3 days later, the streets in front of the court were packed with cameras, banners, and journalists. Some held signs with hashtags "Justice for Emily" and "No More Silence." I never imagined I would see something like that, common people supporting a cause that, until recently, seemed invisible. Emily walked by my side with insecure steps. I took her hand firmly. "You are not alone, daughter. No more." At that moment, a black car stopped in front of the court. Michael got out first, followed by Mr. Edward and Linda. They all wore dark glasses, tense faces, trying to hide their nervousness behind a facade of elegance. Flashes exploded around them. A journalist approached. "Mr. Miller, any comment before the hearing?" Michael barely murmured, "We have nothing to say." We entered. This time the room was full. There were representatives of women's associations, legal observers, and a group of police officers guarding order. The atmosphere was completely different from previous hearings. It was no longer a private farce. It was a public exhibition. The new judge, Judge Herrera, a man with a stern face and firm voice, took his place. "The court will review again all the evidence presented," he said, "and will listen to the witnesses with total impartiality." James, always methodical, opened his folder. "Your Honor, today we present new certified evidence, forensic analysis, of the audio police testimony and video from a neighbor's camera." The judge nodded. On the screen in front of the bench, the video began to play. The images were clear. Emily on her knees under the snow in front of the closed door of that house, her body, trembling arms crossed over her chest. The silence that fell in the room was absolute. No one breathed. The judge stopped. The video looked at Michael. "Can you explain why your wife was outside that night?" Michael swallowed saliva. "It was a misunderstanding. We argued and she went out of her own free will." Mr. Edward intervened with an arrogant tone. "My son only tried to calm her down." There was no bad intention. The judge interrupted him coldly. Below freezing? Without a coat? And you inside the house with the heating on? The murmur of the public became a swell. Some women in the back rows began to cry. Linda Michael's mother tried to speak. She has always been very dramatic, Judge. Sometimes she exaggerates silence, or I remove her from the room ordered. The judge hitting the gavel hard. Michael lowered his head. Sweat ran down his forehead. Emily observed him in silence, without resentment, but with a dignity that broke my soul. James continued with the witnesses. First Daniel spoke, relating what he saw that night and the reports he wrote himself. Then Mrs. Lucy, the hot dog vendor, told how she had found Emily days later, pale, trembling, without strength or money to eat. Finally, Dr. Moore explained the injuries, hypothermia, and signs of psychological trauma. When James finished, the whole room remained silent. The judge reviewed the sheets one by one without looking up. After 2 hours of interrogations, he declared a recess. We went out into the hallway. The press was waiting for us. A young reporter approached me, microphone in hand. William, after so many months, what do you feel seeing this moment? I looked around the cameras, the expectant faces, the common people watching from the windows. I feel, I said slowly, that today fear changed sides. Emily looked at me and nodded. There was truth in those words. Upon returning to the room, the atmosphere was tense. Michael did not look up. Mr. Edward murmured something to his lawyer. The judge asked for silence. The court has deliberated, he announced. Everyone stood up. After reviewing the evidence and testimonies, Rodrigo Miller and his father, Edward Miller, are declared guilty of psychological violence and aggravated abandonment. Restraining order and reparation of damages in favor of Mrs. Emily Miller are dictated. The sound of the gavel resonated like thunder. Emily let out a broken sigh, then tears began to roll down her face. Michael stood petrified. Mr. Edward tried to get up, screaming that everything was a conspiracy, but the agents approached and forced him to sit down. Linda cried in silence, holding a crumpled handkerchief. And then something unexpected happened. From the back of the room, applause was heard. A woman, the same one who had cried during the video, got up from her seat and began to applaud loudly. Then another and another. In seconds, the whole room joined. It was not celebration, it was catharsis. It was justice. The judge did not intervene, simply let that sound fill the space. We left the court holding hands, the cameras, microphones, flashes. Everything was a storm of noise and light, but inside me there was silence, a deep, peaceful silence. An old woman approached me among the crowd. Thank you, William, she told me, squeezing my hands hard. You spoke for all of us. I did not know what to answer. I just nodded and hugged her. The sky was clean, without a cloud. Emily looked up, smiled slightly, and said, Finally, I can breathe. Daniel approached holding a folded document. Master, he told me, smiling, here is the official confirmation. Justice was served. I took the paper carefully. My hands trembled. I looked at it and felt a peace I had never known. Thank you, son, I replied. We will not forget it. That afternoon, headlines multiplied throughout the city. Father and daughter win battle against influential family. The Miller case uncovers corruption in the judicial system. The news whopping up throughout the country. In front of the court, people began to hang violet ribbons and banners with a single phrase, no more silence. That night back home, I turned on the television. I watched the video of Emily leaving the court again, surrounded by cameras, with a serene look, almost at peace. In the background, soft music accompanied the image. I sat on the sofa. She, exhausted, leaned on my shoulder and fell asleep. I looked at her for a long time. I caressed her hair and murmured, almost in a sigh, We have won something bigger than a trial, daughter. We have recovered peace. Outside, the city lights flickered like fallen stars. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that the justice of the heart, the one that is not dictated in any court, had finally reached us. 3 months later, spring returned to Chicago. The trees bloomed along the avenues, covering the ground with a colorful carpet that crunched under people's steps. Winter, with its silence and pain, seemed already a distant memory. Our small apartment had also changed. There was more light, more color. I bought a couple of pots with plants and placed them by the window. I moved the dining table so the morning light entered directly, while we drank coffee. Emily started cooking. At first, everything came out halfway overcooked. Rice burnt, toast soup without salt. But every day she got up early, put an old song on the radio, and practiced with a patience that moved me. Sometimes she hummed softly while stirring the pot, and that simple sound was enough to fill the home with life. Daniel kept visiting us almost every weekend. He arrived with a smile and a bag of donuts or a small bouquet of sunflowers. The two sat at the table, chatting and laughing about simple things, movies, recipes, work. I stayed aside, reading the newspaper, pretending not to listen, although in reality I could not stop smiling. Seeing her laugh again was the greatest prize I could receive. One afternoon, while the sun fell between the branches of the trees, Emily told me, "Dad, I wanted to train with you again." "Martial arts?" "I wanted to recover strength." I looked at her, surprised, but happy. "Then tomorrow we start," I replied. "The bone so heals when the soul starts to do so." We went to the neighborhood park where there was an esplanade of old tiles. I wore my old white uniform. She wore comfortable clothes and new sneakers she had bought with her own savings. We started with stretching. At first her movements were clumsy, but her look was full of determination. Some neighborhood kids approached curious. "Master," they shouted, "teach us too." I let out a laugh and showed them a couple of basic positions. Emily watched them with tenderness, smiling, seeing how they stumbled between laughs. When we finished, we sat on a bench to drink water. The afternoon air was fresh and smelled of wet grass. "You have returned to your path." "Daughter," I told her. She looked at me, eyes shining. "Thank you for not giving up, Dad. If it had not been for you, I do not know where I would be." "You would be here anyway," I replied, "because strength was always inside you. You just needed to remember it." A week later, I received a letter from the Santa Rosa Community Center. They wanted to invite me to open a free self-defense class for women. I did not doubt it for a second. The first day, more than 30 people arrived. There were young women, mothers, grandmothers. Even Mrs. Lucy, the hot dog vendor, appeared with her apron and a huge smile. Emily was also there, standing at the back, with crossed arms and eyes full of pride. I took a deep breath before speaking. Strength is not in the blow, I said, looking at everyone, but in the decision to get up again and again. The women applauded, some with tears. That class was not just about defense. It was about recovering the power that life sometimes takes from us. In the following week, newspapers began to talk about us. A headline read, "The Master Who Turned Pain into Hope." Another mentioned how classes had grown so much that the municipality wanted to support the program. A local television channel invited us to tell our story. Emily accepted. We sat in front of the cameras under the bright studio lights. We talked about fear rage, but above all, resilience. There was no hate in our words, only gratitude for having survived. We learned, I said at the end, that forgiving does not mean forgetting. It means deciding that the past no longer rules us. The interview aired that same night. The next day, the community center filled with messages from women all over the country. Some told that listening to Emily, they had decided to report. Others that they simply felt less alone. That afternoon, when we returned home, Daniel took Emily. I stayed in the backyard while they entered. The sun hid behind the buildings, dyeing the sky orange. I stayed watching the golden light reflect on my completely gray hair. I turned on the kettle, prepared a cup of tea, and opened my old notebook. I wrote slowly with a trembling hand, "Today, finally, my heart is at peace." I closed the notebook and went out to the balcony. The air smelled of flowers and wet earth. Then I heard Emily's voice from inside. "Dad, come, look at this." I went out. In the sky, the first fireworks of Easter Sunday were beginning to explode. Red, gold, violet illuminated the whole city. Emily was wrapped in a blanket, eyes fixed on the lights. I sat next to her on the balcony's wooden bench. A few minutes later, Daniel arrived with a box of cupcakes and a bottle of cider. I thought you would want to celebrate, he said, smiling. We poured 3 glasses and toasted in silence, watching fireworks fall in a cascade over the dark sky. Emily laughed with that laugh I had not heard for months. I never thought that after so much cold there would be such a beautiful day. Winter does not last forever, daughter, I replied. Spring always arrives, even if late. We stayed silent for a while, looking at the horizon. The firework lights reflected in her eyes, and her hair moved gently with the wind. Dad, she said suddenly with a trembling voice, thank you for not letting me fall. Daughter, you were the one who got up. I only accompanied you. She rested her head on my shoulder. I closed my eyes. Time seemed to stop. The noise of the city faded, and only the sound of our breaths remained calm, synchronized. A last firework exploded in the sky, leaving a bright trail. Emily looked up, smiling. Make a wish, Dad. I smiled and closed my eyes. It already came true. We stayed there under the starry sky while the city lights flickered like fireflies. For the first time in many years, I did not think about the past or the struggle, only the present. In that simple and perfect instant, the spring wind blew softly, bringing the distant echo of church bells. I looked at my daughter, her face illuminated by the moonlight, and understood that true justice was not in the courts, nor in the headlines, but in being able to look at those we love and know they are safe. I rested my head against the back of the chair and took a deep breath. The dawn of healing had arrived, and in the middle of that serene silence, with a light heart, I knew that this story, ours, no longer spoke of pain but of love. Because in the end, a father's love can change destiny. When I look back and remember everything we lived, I understand that this story is not only about pain, but about resistance and faith. I learned that a father can fall 1,000 times, but never stops getting up for his daughter. That true love is not demonstrated with words, but with actions, even when the whole world seems to be against you. Today, I want to tell you something from the heart. Never stay silent before injustice. Silence only protects the guilty. Sometimes life takes us to the limit, but there, right where there seems to be no way out, God puts the strength to continue. If you were in my place, seeing your daughter suffer while others mock, what would you have done? Would you have had the courage to face everything, or would you have lowered your head? Tell me in the comments. I want to read every opinion. I want to hear your voice, because every story of yours also matters. And remember, God always blesses those who fight from the heart.